Zucker nodded. "Your dad is going to do great. He's so honest those judges could not believe a thing he says when he says it." The courtroom grew still. Static electricity welded Harry's suit to his skin. His son and Zucker scurried to the gallery as the marshal's oyez thundered. Chief Justice Frederick Vincent pounded his gavel. He reminded Harry of a hit-'em-hard football coach. "We will hear arguments this morning in the case of United States of America versus Paramount Pictures et al." Robert Wright, the Deputy Attorney General of the Antitrust Division, rose to address the court. His puritanical upbringing as the son of the demanding architect Frank Lloyd Wright had stripped him of compassion. Like many of his WASP colleagues in the Justice Department, he resented the Eastern European Jewish immigrants who wielded untrammeled cultural influence over his country. This was his chance to cut the Horatio Algerbergs down to size. "I have prosecuted scores of businessmen for violations of the Sherman Antitrust Act, but none has been so deliberate and deceitful a defendant as the so-called Big Five motion picture studios." "Bast Meg," Zucker cursed in his native Hungarian, while Skouras muttered an unflattering epithet in Greek. Wright glared in their direction. "The Big Five not only produce and distribute virtually all the movies made in America, they also own a significant number of the nation's theaters. They have used their monopoly power to harm independent exhibitors. And who are these exhibitors? They are small businessmen, families for the most part, working to keep their one theater in operation. The FBI conducted a secret 15-month investigation of 500 towns which conclusively proved the industry's guilt. The trial jury convicted the Big Five on all counts. Now the defendants are demanding a reversal. We ask that you order the studios to sell all of their theaters and exit the exhibition business permanently. Divorcement is the only remedy that will curtail their abuses." "Off with their heads. Hang 'em high. Fry the bastards." That was how divorcement translated to panicky movie executives. Economic catastrophe loomed because the studios earned most of their profits from their theaters. In typically understated fashion, Variety, Hollywood's newspaper of record, had labeled today's hearing Armageddon. Harry knew that the Big Five had played far over the edge of legality for decades, so 3 months ago he'd negotiated a settlement with the Justice Department that would have allowed them to maintain ownership of a limited number of theaters. But the moguls were too greedy to lose any profits. They'd rejected the compromise and assigned Harry the mission of keeping the court from approving Wright's draconian request. He'd reminded everyone that as a studio executive he hadn't tried a case in years. But his bosses and colleagues had argued that no one knew more about the issues than him, including their attorneys who'd lost in the lower courts, and no one presented a more true-blue image of the industry. Insiders whispered that if Harry succeeded, he was destined to head a studio. But that prospect meant nothing today. It was the specter of failure that gripped him. The bigwigs had a habit of pumping up their expectations only to wind up bitterly disappointed. He feared joining those actors marked for stardom who disappeared after the movies that were supposed to make them stars died at the box office. For 15 minutes, Justices Black, Jackson, and Burton lobbed softball questions at his opponent. Harry exchanged disbelieving looks with Cantwell. Did the justices intend to invite Wright over for tea? In the face of the court's obvious sympathy, Harry waived his opening statement to devote full time to questions from the skeptical judges. William O. Douglas fired first. "Dmitri Glendakis built a state-of-the-art theater in Fresno, California, but no major studio sold him a single feature. Is that how your clients reward excellence and innovation?" "Our attorneys advised Mr. Glendakis before he broke ground that we could not provide films for his proposed theater because we had pre-existing obligations to other theaters in that zone." "Weren't those pre-existing obligations to your own theaters?" "And to the theaters of other companies," Harry responded. "But we did offer him 3 other areas in which to build." Vincent cut to the government's most damaging assertion. "Mr. Jastrow, how do you defend the practice of block booking? It sounds to the court suspiciously like a dictatorship." "We admit to selling in blocks of 10 to 15 films. We specify exactly which films are to be shown on what dates and for how many weeks. Otherwise, the independent theater owners would cherry-pick our highest-profile product. Then the studios couldn't make movies that looked less commercial up front. We call them sleepers because there wouldn't be guaranteed playtime." If those movies are so marginal, perhaps you shouldn't make them at all. Each year, 60% of our movies lose us money. Unfortunately, before we make them, we don't know which 60%. The courtroom burst into laughter. Harry maintained a straight face, but the echo of his son's giggle buoyed him. The motion picture business is one of the riskiest in America. Each of the major studios produces approximately 30 films annually at an average cost of $2 million and spends millions more in marketing. The exhibitors bear none of this risk. If the public doesn't come, they return our prints at no cost. The more probing the questions from the bench, the more unflappable Harry became. Skepticism switched to curiosity. Zucker, Skouras, and the stars edged forward, anticipating a Capra moment. Go for it, Harry told himself, like Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Early in the century, when movie producers didn't own theaters, there was chaos in our industry. Product shortages, bankruptcies, broken contracts, illegal combines. For the past 30 years, the studio's ownership of theaters has created prosperity, and the peace has allowed our filmmakers to create the first truly American art form. That progress will wither if the court grants the Justice Department's request and obliterates the core structure of the business. We admit that abuses have occurred, but we urge you to abandon the overkill of theater divorcement and concentrate instead on more limited solutions. The moguls mobbed him. "You're the greatest counterpuncher since Tunney," Skouras proclaimed. "We're going to beat those fuckers." "Watch your language," Zucker pointed to AJ. "Sorry. Your dad's a genius, kid." Trying to mimic the adults, AJ shook his father's hand. That made Harry feel like a hero. They burst onto the steps of the Supreme Court building, bracing against the chill winter winds, just in time to see officials from the Justice Department slapping Bob Wright's back for a job well done. Reality trumped elation. Cort was a crapshoot, and it would be May before the Big Five learned if their dice had rolled Lucky 7 or Snake Eyes. AJ studied the room service menu at the Hay Adams Hotel with the intensity he applied to a multiple-choice quiz in Miss Alder's math class. Rule 1, eliminate obvious no's. That killed oatmeal because he hated the lumps, and eggs because he'd eaten them scrambled, boiled, and shirred on the train coming east. Rule 2, go with a choice that makes sense. It was Rice Krispies with a banana, until he ignored Rule 3, avoid unknowns. AJ didn't recognize the name, but he enjoyed an adventure, so he ordered toast, bacon, and coffee for his father and smoked kippers and a glass of milk for himself. In 4th grade, he had abandoned his given name because he intended to win the Academy Award and thought that produced by Albert Julius Jastrow would look old-fashioned on the screen. Alternatively, if he joined the PGA Tour, A.J. Jastrow would fit better on the trophies. Only his father knew his golf ambition because Mom would have brained both of them. A.J. Jastrow, Esquire. After Dad's triumph yesterday, he had to consider the law. He'd heard Miss Turner tell Mr. Cagney how his father's square chin and Roman nose reminded her of a Jewish Clark Kent. A.J. checked his jawline in the mirror. He looked more like Jimmy Olsen. "Son, are you ready?" "I've got to finish packing." "Well, hurry up. I've got a couple of surprises for our last day." When room service arrived, a black waiter with gray hair and a gold front tooth laid out gleaming silverware on a linen tablecloth. He set 2 plates in front of the Jastrows and removed the domes with a flourish. A.J. had assumed kippers were a sausage, not a relative of the herring. They looked and smelled like the soles of his old sneakers. But he'd ordered them, so he tasted a bite which was so salty that he had to gulp down the milk. The combination reminded him of castor oil. "Something wrong?" "No, the kippers are really good. For kippers." "Let's skip breakfast and get donuts at our first stop." His father's bad knee, the one shot up in the war, froze in the cold, but together they hiked up the marble stairs to the Lincoln Memorial. Dad whispered as if he were in temple, describing how the 36 marble columns represented each state on the day the president died. The statue of the man seated in his chair made A.J. feel small. Why does Lincoln look so sad? He won the Civil War. He wanted to take his family back to Illinois, but there was still a big job left to do. Maybe he knew he would never see home again. Usually, Dad gave more details. The heroes of American history were his heroes. Unlike AJ's, he preferred the